Yes, recording.
Okay, so listen, guys, I wanted to thank you very, very much. I think the fact that we can all see each other during this period of quarantine is very therapeutic. And I hope in addition to that, we can learn things. We're obviously dealing with Bava Kamma as discussed, which are the laws of damages and compensation, both to one's person and one's property caused by another's property or another individual. That's the bottom line of the areas that are covered. I hope Hashem, in the merit of this, blesses all of us and all of Klal Yisrael with health and safety. And although we're all learning together, I mean, I'm not qualified to give over a shiur. If you want a real shiur, you can go to Rav Schottenstein, or you can go to Rabbi Ran Cohen. Both of them are superb. But you stuck with me in the meantime. So thank you very much. I found it very therapeutic to see you guys. So we're going to just start off with the principle. And what's going to happen is if you got any questions, with the greatest of pleasure, you must ask. If you're not following, you need to stop me and ask, because it's quite difficult for me to ask each one of you and say to you, do you understand? Do you understand? Do you understand? So it's up to you to say to me, I'm not quite getting it, or I need help. And obviously the questions that we're dealing with have to be relevant exactly to the subject matter. Otherwise, we're going to go off on a tangent. But this is here for you guys. So I'm just very, very happy to help. So before I start, do you have any questions?
No.
No. All good on my side.
Okay. Firstly, I wanted to thank Arthur, who spent tireless hours dealing with the technical issues. I mean, we did have some teething problems. And Arthur, thank you very, very much. I can't thank you enough.
No problem.
Thanks, Arthur, from all of us.
Thumbs
Thank
up.
you. Much appreciated.
Really, because everybody's got their area of expertise. It's amazing. And Arthur, without you, I would have a heck of a problem. I wanted to thank Michael Kupovitz and Gavin, because they've been through the first couple of daf before, and they've been kind enough to want to do chazorah, which is repetition, it's good to learn, but the novelty factor has left, and I appreciate the fact that they're seeing the movie again. So, Michael, thank you. And also, Gav, thank you very much.
Always good to be doing it again.
No, pleasure. It's a tough subject, so it's worthwhile going through it.
Yeah, and then when I chatted to Barry, I wanted to thank him, because I know you've got a lot on your plate at the moment, especially you having to look after your brother, and the time might not be the most conducive, but thank you for making the effort, and it's a very interesting subject. So with that, Barry, thanks for joining us as well.
Sure, welcome.
Cool. All right, so I just wanted to get started. So what the Talmud is made up of is two things. It's made of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So the Mishnah is the bottom line case where it sets up the scene, and the Gemara goes into it in detail in terms of what the Mishnah covers. And it's more of an explorative explanation of the Mishnah. And what you'll find with the Gemara is that sometimes it appears to go off on a tangent, but it's done in a very, very clever way, because it's done to induce thought process, and also a questioning and inquisitiveness that you wouldn't get if you went in a linear fashion, because we're not learning dry facts here. What we're learning is cases that affect real people. It's not just theory. And the reason why it affects real people, I think I've said this to you individually, is today you've got two forms of law. In South Africa, you've got Roman Dutch law, or I think it's mainly more Roman in nature. In England, you've got British law and American, and both the jury system as well as individual judges are based on Talmudic law, because English law is based on Saxon law. And when the Saxons took over Northumberland, it was part of Rome. So it all developed from Rome, and Rome, when they killed and plundered their way through different cultures, took the best of everything. They took mathematics from the Greeks, and they took the law system from the Jews. Based on that, a lot of the current laws that we've got today have this as a basis. So the Mishnah starts off on the following. It starts off with the four primary damages. So it starts with Hashor, the ox, Habor, the pit, Hamave, the mave, and Haever, the fire. So what these 4 damages are your particular property or something that you've caused. And it's going to go through the various damages. So I'm just going to read it to you. Now, I sent you all the scriptural notes before, but before we get started, I don't know if any of you went on Safari. I'm going to actually set the scene. Have all of you got the link to Safari, by the way?
Yes.
Barry, do you also?
I'm not really sure about that one. Which one is that one?
Safari was a link I sent you, obviously, on WhatsApp. What I'm just going to do is quickly share the screen. Just hang on a second.
I've got it here in front of me. Is it the one you sent yesterday?
Yeah, I'm just going to share the screen a second. Well. Okay. Arthur's coming here to rescue me, which I really appreciate. Thank you, mate.
Okay,
I just want to share the Safari link.
Okay.
I just, in fact, want to open it up.
You want to open this one up? Okay.
Just hang on, Arthur. No.
One here? Which one do you want?
No, just give me 1 sec.
Okay.
Tell you now.
Just open the page and I'll show you where it is. I'll show you how to share. It's no problem.
Yeah, this is it.
Okay. So what you do, Damon, is very simple. Go here. Okay. Come in here. Just bring that back here because that's up.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Arthur.
Then from there, you know where to go.
Okay. So I'm just going to share the screen and show you where it is. Okay. So basically, Bava Kamma is found on both the Schottenstein Gemara as well as Safari.org. So Bava Kamma is the first daf, and it starts off with the Mishnah that says there are 4 primary categories of damage: the category of the ox, the category of the pit, the category of the mave, which is based on a discussion in the Gemara, which refers either to the tooth of an animal that causes damage or to a person that causes damage, and the category of fire. Now, when you first read this,
can you actually zoom a bit more into the Bava Kamma page because it's
sure,
really small.
I can with pleasure.
I'm blind as a bat.
I'm just trying to think how to zoom in.
If you go to the top here where the 3 dots are, see the 3 dots on your top right hand corner? 3 dots. There's 3 dots underneath it, and under the blue D. Under the blue D. And there's a zoom button.
Zoom, I see it.
So just click on it and make it bigger so it's above that. Perfect.
Okay.
Now we can all see it. Better, guys?
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It's difficult to see what you see. So when we read this at first, it's going to make no sense. So some of the Gemara that I'm going to give over is going to be more conversational. The reason being is if you're just reading it in the book, there's very little purpose of the shear. So it goes into the 4 categories of damage: the category of the ox, the pit, the mave, and the fire. And we're going to go into a discussion because there's a dispute in terms of what mave is actually about. Okay? So I'm going to leave it there, and then I'm going to discuss it from this point. The reason being that I'm going to discuss it a little bit more organically, and you can find that link on Safari, is it's actually very difficult to concentrate on both the reading and what we're discussing here. Okay. So I'm just going to read it, and then we're going to go through it. So there are 4 primary damages. Hashor is the ox, Habor is the pit, Hamave, and Haever, which is the fire. So it's what the Mishnah does at first is it contrasts the one with the other. It says the ox is not like the mave, and the mave is not like the ox. And neither this nor this. And when it says that in the Gemara, neither this nor this, it means that the 2 above examples, the ox and the mave, are not comparable to each other. So the first thing it wants to state is that it's bringing different categories because each of the categories have different characteristics to each other. And the reason being is if they had the same characteristics, there'd be no reason to bring up a second topic of exactly the same thing. So there's certain characteristics that these different categories have in common, and there's certain characteristics that set them apart in terms of their propensity to damage, how they damage, and what you're responsible for. So the categories of ox and mave are referred to as living damages. They're part of your property or part of you that create a damage, and they're living. So what the Gemara refers to as a living thing is something that has a breath of life. They don't mean living as in movement, where it appears living. And it does bring that as the next point. It does say that the ox, the mave, and fire, which are not living things, are things that its way is to go forth and damage, meaning they're moving, they're not stationary. And the pit is its way not to go forth and damage. In other words, that's a stationary damage. And then we're just going to go with the bottom line of the Mishnah, and then we're going to go through the whole exposition. Okay? Okay, let me just go through the notes. All right. So the Mishnah concludes the common characteristics to all of them is that their way is to damage, and the obligation of watching them is upon you, the owner. And when any of these damages does damage, the owner of the damager is obligated to make payment for the damage with the choicest of land. Now, when we're going to go through the term the choicest of land, what that has to do with is the fact that you can't give substandard payments for damages that you cause. So certain categories have leniency, but others are more stringent. But you cannot pay back with items that do not really fulfill the loss that the person achieved. So we're going to go through a whole argument in some of the later Gemaras what the choicest of land means. So the choicest of land could be in relation to what the person owns. In other words, they've got high quality land, medium quality, and low quality. Or is the land that they want to pay back the damages from a high quality in relation to what they own, but low in terms of international standards? Or maybe it's compared to the standards of the person that they damaged. So all of these discussions in terms of the quality of the land is going to be addressed in later Gemaras. In the meantime, what we're trying to determine is set the scene of what's involved. So basically, you'll have a case where, why they call it primary damages with the ox, the pit, the mave, and the fire, is that there's subcategories that fall under there that are similar and dissimilar. So I'll give you an example. Under ox, you've got three categories. You've got keren, which keren means the horn of the animal, and then you've got shein, which is the tooth of the animal, and then you've got basically regel, which is the foot of the animal, how the animal works. And within that particular category, the subcategories are have their own sort of subcategories. So, for example, you've got categories that relate to an animal's gratification, other animals that relate to intent damage, and others that are the normal way that the animals work. So at the moment, what we're going to do is just discuss what it means by a primary damager and a secondary damager. Okay? So primary damager is known as an av. Obviously, the plural is avos, and the subcategory damager is known as a torda, or in plural tordos. So I'll give you an example. If you have a look, do any of you have Safari open or not at all? Because otherwise I can just explain it to you.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So, Barry and Arthur, I just wanted to go through one or two things with you because Michael and Gavin are a little bit more familiar.
Okay, James?
Yeah?
I'll show you something quickly if you want us to send
Sure.
pages here on our computer. It's a way of sending us a message altogether. I'm going to show you that.
Okay.
Quickly. You can just copy the link. Let me just go back into Teams here. Give me a second. come back here. Just wait for it to open. Okay, connecting, and then putting in the password. Log on. Okay, so let's say you want to get us to that. Just take me back to where you were before, Dan. To the file that you want to copy.
File that I want to copy. You're talking about when?
That's a Safari. It's Safari, yeah, there. So what you do is copy that there, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Now in your thing here, you have a thing called chat. Okay, let's go back here. A thing called chat, right?
Okay.
Click on chat. Let's get that out there. You can say to the chat group and to everyone, you can just paste the link in, and then we can all see the link and click on it. Boom.
Okay.
So I should say, I see a chat coming up. I should be able to, okay, so you have to copy that link. Okay, you'll have to copy that link out because it's not clickable for some reason. So
okay, so that's fine now.
Copy.
Okay, so I tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach it out of the Mishnah and the Gemara because it's just going to be an easier way to understand. Because I know Barry hasn't had a chance to go through the Mishnah and the Gemara. You have. Okay. So before we go into ox and pit and mave and fire, I just want to go to ox specifically because this is going to explain what tordos and avos is. So you've got a main category with the ox. The ox itself is what you call a heading. Even though it's known as a primary damager, there are three primary damagers under ox. And the first primary damager that you've got, I think Michael and Gavin realize, is that you've got Keren. So Keren, Barry, is when you've got an ox that damages via its horn. In other words, it gores either a person or an animal. Okay? So the main category would be under ox. You'd have Keren, which is a horn. Then what you've got is you've got sub-damages. I'm sorry, guys, to go away from the Gemara, because actually when you read it, it's not going to make any sense. When I taught it to Marco and Gavin, did it make more sense when I read it out of the Gemara? Just need your feedback.
Yeah, it was excellent. It was perfect.
Okay. Yeah, because this is a struggle. I'm trying to maintain the integrity of reading the Gemara, but the same token, it's not making any sense this way. When I taught it to Marco organically, did it make more sense? Marco?
Well, yeah, it does when one can sort of, we've discussed it sort of backwards and forwards. If I can make a suggestion.
Please.
Perhaps, I think you stick with the ox and don't, just try and explain, other and tools around that.
I prefer to. I hope you don't.
Don't get too much, like further more. Just explain the primary and secondary category around the ox.
Well, that's what I did last time, which is not the way the Gemara does it. But I feel if I do it in a more conversational way, what that actually would be is it would make much more common sense. Because, Barry, if I'm just reading it, I felt very bad last night because I thought maybe when I taught it to Marco or I taught it to Gavin, I was diversifying too much and saying it in my own way. Because if I'm reading it like this, it goes off a whole tangent and you don't know what's going on. So if I can just stick it to the conversation that I had with the two of you, did that work for you? Because that works much better than the way we're doing it now.
Just stay away from maybe the Mishnah Gemara right now.
Great.
Just talk around it, just in a very general fashion. But don't,
okay. Okay. I just want to make one caveat then. Is that I'm doing this and I'm to blame for it. You get what I'm saying? This is not what the Moshna. No, because then you have dreams that you're going to get punished because you never taught it properly. And so I'm just having a conversation, and the way that I did it with you, Michael, and the way I did it with Gavin was a heck of a lot easier. So, Barry, we're not going to go into the whole Gemara and Mishnah. Let's just have conversations about these concepts, and it's going to be a lot clearer. Number one, under the primary damager of Keren. So Keren means that an animal damages with intent to damage. It's hatful, and it's going to damage with a couple of different methods. Now, when it mentions, for example, Keren with the horn, Keren with the horn refers to a biblical mentioning. So anything that has to do with the primary damager, as in the main category Keren, is a biblical reference, and any of the subcategories that have issues in common with it are very similar in theme and concept, but aren't mentioned biblically, but follow the same sort of idea. So, for example, biblically it will mention Keren, which is the horn, and then the concept of an animal bashing you with its body, or kicking, or squatting, or biting. All of these sort of things are an animal's frustration taken out on another animal or person. There is even a term for pushing, meaning that the animal turns around and claps you with the horn. But that still is within the category of Keren, meaning its intent is to do damage. So the unique characteristic of Keren is an ox that has intent to damage. Then under the content of Shane, which is a primary category, again it's mentioned in the Torah, and we'll go through the Torah sources, is tooth. So anything mentioned under that subcategory has to do with an animal getting physical gratification from its damage. So if an animal goes in the field of another person, or the owner lets the animal in the field of another person, and that animal grazes into private property land, or all of a sudden it's going and it's rubbing its back against the wall. You're living in the middle of Linksfield, and and a car bashes your wall. Then obviously a person is liable today. But in those days, an animal would rub against the wall for physical gratification. And in the case where the animal, hi Lewis, hi Lewis, and in the case where an animal rubbed against the wall for self-gratification and it fell over, that would be under the gratification of physical eating. Another thing that obviously would be covered is if an animal rolls over in hay and a person's got a field and it smells very horsey, you're not going to sell that as prime quality bread. So all of a sudden that's been ruined if the animal relieves itself for pleasure, physical gratification, and damages things from the smell of the urine, etc. That would also be a category under which would be shame. So again, shame is mentioned biblically, but the other tordos are not, but they're common in respect to the fact that they share the same theme of physical gratification. Your last category that you're dealing with is regal. So regal would be known as literally the foot, meaning it's the most common form of damage, because when the animal's walking, it's naturally going to create damage. Whatever it's walking on, it's literally trampling. So when it tramples on things, in that particular case, you're responsible for that sort of damage. So any of the subcategories when it's walking, in other words, if an animal you've got a yak, you've got these furry sort of animals. So the animal walks past and its fur hooks on a utensil or somebody's jacket, and it rips their Christian Dior jacket, etc. You're responsible. They used to be able to put a backpack on an animal to carry things, or put a bit in its mouth. So anything that an animal has, even that you pack onto it, when it walks and it does damage, you're responsible for. That's a common sort of damage. So those would fall under regal, and because those other categories are similar in nature, but regal is mentioned biblically. So what happens is any of the primary damages that you have are mentioned biblically, and any of the thematic categories that fall under that are not mentioned biblically, but thematically are the same. Am I making any sense to you guys now? Arthur, yes. Barry?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to go through is what this means. So any primary damager, you can think of it as a folder in computer terms, is known as an avos. Primary damages are avos. The singular is avot, is an av. And then tordos, which literally means offspring, or torda is singular, are the subcategories. So rather than thinking of a father category and offspring, I think in today's computer terms, we like to think of categories and subcategories. Now, one of the issues I wanted to bring is that what the Gemara is trying to determine is that if the categories primary and the subcategories are exactly the same. In other words, there's a discussion with Rav Papa, who you'll see over the next few dafs, brings that there are cases where the subcategories are not like the primary categories, and there are cases where the subcategories are like the primary categories. So in terms of ox, we're going to go through each one. Are there similarities in ox with the subcategories to the categories? We're going to go through pit, mave, etc. And while this whole thing is going to take place, it's not an intellectual exercise. We want to see for the subcategories, are we liable to the same level of damage as we are with the primary categories, and what are the differences? Okay. So now that I've, yeah?
Can just, you brought up something interesting there. So, and I'm asking this, probably have asked it already, but I'll just maybe for, just for everybody else's sake.
Sure.
Is one way of differentiating between what's primary and secondary, has it got anything to do with the severity of the damage?
Okay, so that's a brilliant question, and we're gonna deal with it now, because what the Gemara is actually going to bring is discussion about both intensity, i.e. severity, versus less severe, and see cases from other Gemaras about how this affects payment. Because in theory, if it's as severe, the payment should be the same. If it's less severe, the payment should be part thereof. So that question's brilliant. That's exactly what the Gemara is going to come to establish. But firstly, what it wanted to say is that the Torah is not going to cover every example that's ever going to exist of damage. When it sets up these primary categories, what it does, just like the Ten Commandments, is like when it sets up the thematic basis, and then underneath with all your subcategories, you get to see what's involved. So that's exactly what's going to be determined. And exactly as you said, Rav Papa brings examples where the severity is less on the Tordos, and some where the severity is equal, and that's what that's what the journey is about.
So in other words, when we try and differentiate between a primary and a subcategory, we're looking at, sometimes we look at it and say, well, it's very much the same, and therefore by establishing that it's very much the same type of thing, we are saying to ourselves that the damages that are paid out must be very similar, and there's hardly a difference between the two. Otherwise, if they're different, then there's a greater degree of damages that are paid out in obviously the up case versus the subcategory. Is that one way of looking at it? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the way.
Why are we looking at why are we putting things into categories and subcategories? We're doing that because we want to look at whether these cases are similar or dissimilar, and if they're dissimilar, then the severity of them and the damages paid as a result will be different. Am I correct?
You are correct, but there are certain cases where even if they're similar, the payments might not be the same because there are other factors that come to play. But if we take the other factors away, you are correct. So what we're going to determine now, bringing in other Gemaras in a very simple bottom line way, is it the fact that the primary is the most stringent, or is it the case that the primary is just the historical verification of what's mentioned in the Torah? Meaning, is that primordial example, or is that the most stringent one actually brought, and that's brought to show the most stringent? So that's a brilliant question.
So obviously anything that's derived, so that comes from the Torah, it's obviously setting the benchmark of a particular case, and at the same time, it may or may not reflect the fact that this is the most severe situation, not necessarily, but
correct.
But the derisa mention of it and putting it into a primary category obviously is significant because it describes all the types of situations around that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most severe case. Correct.
Correct, but you are onto something that it is the most significant. So, for example, when Keren, as a primary category of ox, Barry, when that is mentioned as the Av, because you've got Keren, Shane, and Regel. Those are the three Avos, the three main categories, and each one has a subcategory that falls under the main. It's mentioned simply because it was the most. The Torah doesn't mention it. We don't only follow it because the Torah mentions it. The Torah mentions it because legally it was the most common form of damage. So these are the cases with the highest probability that are going to come up. So exactly as Marco said, it's not only a case of we follow it because the Torah mentions ox, for example. We mention ox because it's more likely that if you're in an agricultural society, that an ox is going to cause damage than a mongoose. It was from a societal point of view, it was relevant cases, and it wasn't theory. You had to pay on these damages. What's going to be an interesting discussion in following Gemara's, which we are going to discuss, is what happens if you have a drone that's under your control, but you're using it via proxy to a drone, the flying drone, that you control, and that your control, you've got a drone and it claps somebody in the head, but the thing of it is, it's not directly through you. It doesn't have a mind of its own. What category would it fall in? I mean, Rabbi Cohen brings some of these sort of issues. Can it say that the computer's going AWOL in the drone, your lack of control, etc.? So all of these are going to be brought forth into modern cases. One of the most interesting ones will be car accidents, because this is the most common form of damage. So we're going to quickly go now to the categories and subcategories in terms of biblical reference. I'm going to keep it very short, but it's going to bring on Marco's cases point by point. So the first thing it's going to go into Gemara Shabbos. And it says that the primary melochas are 40 minus 1. There are 39 melochas. Okay? Now, Barry, there are 39 prohibitions in Shabbos that a person cannot transgress. And those particular transgressions are based on the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. All of those 39 prohibitions on Shabbos, they were creative acts that were used to build the Mishkan. That you know. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason, how do they derive that from the Mishkan, is that the prohibitions in terms of Shabbos are mentioned in the same verse as building the Mishkan. So you have something called a Gezerah Shava, and you're saying that the theme goes from one to the next. It's not cited in a completely different context. It's in that context. That's how we know what the 39 are. So I'm going to bring one particular case here, and it's going to explain Marco's points beautifully. Marco, that was spot on. Spot on. So the first thing of it is that you've got an Av, and an Av would be, for example, planting, because that's mentioned in the Torah. Then you've also got an Av, which is reaping, which is harvesting. That's mentioned straightforward in an agricultural society in the Torah. So those two are prohibited, and they're known as avos. Avos means anything that's mentioned in the Torah as a prohibition. Then what you do, for example, under planting is you've got what you call a tordos. So what's planting? So so watering is a tordos of planting, and I'll tell you why. If you water your plant, what are you doing? You are enhancing plant growth. Am I correct, Barry?
Right.
So anything that obviously is similar in nature to the Av, the reason it's bringing Gemara Shabbos is it's saying that the tordos, the subcategories of the Avos, of the primary category, is similar in nature. In other words, when you're watering flowers, it's enhancing plant growth. It's equivalent to whether you're planting a new plant or you're enhancing the growth. It's both conceptually the exact same category. So even if you have a look at reaping, if you cut a flower and you put it on your Shabbos table, you can do it before Shabbos, but you can't do it on Shabbos because that's known as harvesting. You might not be harvesting wheat, but daisies or daisies. You're inhibiting a plant's growth by killing it. So in that case, that would be a torda, because the Torah is not going to mention every case. In those days, it wasn't trendy to collect daffodils and daisies, unless you were of a different persuasion. But most of the time, people harvested wheat. Okay. So then what we want to say is we want to bring, and the reason we're bringing in Shabbos is we're bringing up a case of what is the punishment, exactly as Michael said. What is the punishment of an Av versus a Torda, a category versus a subcategory? So if we have a look, Arthur, you still with us? Arthur, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still with you. I'm listening.
Okay. I couldn't see because I'm looking at. I'm looking obviously at notes in the Gemara and trying to summarize it in a conversation. That's fine. Okay. So there's two different types. So if you break one of the 39 melachos mentioned in the Torah on purpose with hasroa, which means warnings, and the witnesses, and the full shtick is there, where they can have a court case against you, and you've been warned, and all of those ticks of the boxes have been done, you get the death penalty. It's a death penalty offense to break the Shabbos on purpose, with witnesses, with warnings, etc., etc. Fine. Now, this is the interesting thing. A torda, to break the Shabbos on a torda, meaning not written in the Torah, but under the subcategory, which is a subcategory, you also get the death penalty. So this answers Michael's question in Gemara Shabbos. The torda gets exactly the same extreme penalty as the Av. So according to Gemara Shabbos, this would in fact answer Rav Papa's question that the subcategory would so far seem to be the same as the primary category. They both get the death penalty. Does that make sense, Barry? Arthur?
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I'm checking it makes sense with both of you is because you haven't done it before. So that's fine. Now, obviously, if you do both an Av and a Torda together, you get the death penalty for both. They're not going to give you, Arthur?
No, I'm telling my son to stop. Sorry, I wasn't on mute there.
Okay. So you're not going to get the death penalty. Am I breaking up? Marco, am I breaking up?
It's clear to me.
It's clear to me.
Breaking up, but you're okay now. It's fine now.
Okay, sorry, Marco.
No,
okay. So you even if you break the Torah and the Av, they can't give a person a death penalty twice. You get one death penalty, but you do get the death penalty where you have to your death makes a kapara for both the Av and the Torahs. Let's talk about something a little bit less dramatic. Let's talk about what you call b'shogeg, which means in a state of unawareness, unwittingly. So you're not aware of what's happened. Now, there are two ways that a person can be unaware that they break Shabbos. I've spoken to Michael and Gavin about this. Arthur, do you have any idea of the two ways that a person can break Shabbos?
Without the
we spoke about, sorry, you can hear me. I think we spoke about that the other day. The one is, you actually mentioned, the one is where you're not knowledgeable that you're breaking Shabbos because you don't know what it is. That's the one way. And the other way
very good.
Was also, what is the second way? You could get a discussion about it. Wait, the other way you mentioned, I love being on the spot, it's my favorite.
Yeah, well, join my world.
No, the other way you mentioned to me was, okay, the one is, you actually changed the wording around, because we actually had quite a bit of discussion about it. Lucky this memory problem is good for me.
Okay, so if I can take the heat off you, anybody else have a suggestion?
Yeah, I can answer it.
Yes, Gav.
So if you accidentally knock something over, if you accidentally switch on a light, if it's accidental.
Okay, but what about that? No, you're right in the fact that it's accidental, but accidental.
So you know the law. So you've got. So the one is the absence of knowledge. Okay, which is what Arthur said. The
Correct,
other one is
nicely worded.
The other one is you've got the knowledge, but you accidentally go against the knowledge accidentally.
No. So you onto something. So how it is, let's just put it in a better term, is that you're right. The first one, both you and Arthur are right, that you don't know that act is prohibited on Shabbat. And the second one is you're not aware of Shabbat. Let me give you an example. Friday night, 3 o'clock in the morning, you need the loo. You go to the loo, and you either left the bathroom light on Shabbos, so you go to the loo, and as you come out, you switch the light off and you go back to bed. Now, it suddenly dawns on you the next morning that your light's off. Because at the time, you were so moggy that you weren't aware it was Shabbos. You weren't aware that it was, in fact, the Zman of Shabbos, the time of Shabbos, the day of Shabbos. So the one is an act where you don't know that the act is prohibited, and the other one that you don't know that, in fact, it's Shabbat. I mean, you do have a case where a person walks against and knocks a light or knocks something out. That I suppose is accidental. But the unwitting means here is that you're not knowledgeable. Is that I will give you an example. It's happened to me. I've had my alarm clock that I've set during the week, and I forgot to turn off the alarm. And I woke up on Saturday morning, got out of bed in a half coma, and turned off the alarm, go back to sleep, and woke up and realized I turned off an alarm on Shabbat. I'm sure it's happened to you.
You just weren't thinking. You were, one's not fully cognizant.
At that stage, exactly, Michael, I wasn't cognizant it was Shabbat. I wasn't aware it was Shabbat. If you had to ask me in a state of awareness, am I aware that it's Shabbat? If, in other words, you stopped me, for some reason you stayed in the guest bedroom, and as I walked towards you, said, Damon, you can't touch it, it's Shabbos, I would have realized, obviously, you can't. But I wasn't aware it was even Shabbos. I didn't know what day it was, literally and figuratively. So those are the two sorts of unwitting violation a person can have. Okay. So now that we've got that, we've got to discuss in terms of, if it's unwitting, we've got to work on, is the Torah, the subcategory, the same for the Av and the Torah in unwitting? So what happens is, if you don't know that you've done it, you actually have to bring a korban chatas. It's a sin offering, so that you're not responsible. People make mistakes. They didn't do it on purpose. So in the old days, you brought a korban chatas. Now, you bring a korban chatas whether or not it's an Av or a Torah. In other words, I watered the garden. I bring one for that. That's a Torah. On a separate issue, I actually planted something. That's an Av. I have to bring two chatas offerings for both an Av and a Torah. Does that make sense? So it appears here that the Torahs are just as intense as the Avos. The subcategories are just as intense as the subcategories. So let me just give you the primary example it brings in the Gemara. Firstly, you cut some plants, you did some reaping, you actually cut them. That is an Av in the Torah. You're not allowed to perform that's mentioned. Then, in a later stage in the garden, you actually watered some plants. Now, the Torah here is different to the Av. And in those cases, you bring a chatas offering. But there is an interesting difference. And I'll tell you what the interesting difference is that if you perform a Torah and an Av of the same category, you only have to bring one korban chatas. Are you all with me? Arthur, you with me?
So okay. So apply the example again where you only. So you're saying okay. You mentioned the example now. So let's recap. You mentioned the example right now of
yes.
The korban chatas applying to the situation where Av and the Toldos apply. It applies to the Av and the Toldos. The situation, was when you weren't aware of Shabbos and you did something, switching the lights.
So let me just clarify. I apologize. So again, if the category of the Av and the Toldos are different, you bring two different sin offerings.
Right.
Meaning, it doesn't matter whether it's an Av or a Toldos. Barry, are you with me? It doesn't matter if it's a primary category mentioned on the Torah or a subcategory that is not mentioned in the Torah but is also prohibited. If you get the death penalty for a Toldos, which is a subcategory, you certainly bring out korban chatas. If one gives their life for something like that, there's certainly a korban chatas. The only time there's a difference is when it's in the same subcategory as the primary category. So in other words, if we take two separate categories, the one Av is that you're reaping, so you're cutting some flowers. That's one category, it's an Av. But you commit a completely different Toldos of a different category, meaning watering a plant, which is part of planting. It has nothing to do with reaping. You bring two different korban chatases, two different sacrifices, because they're two separate issues. You can't kill somebody twice, so you'd get one death penalty, but you're getting one death penalty for two different transgressions. The only difference is that if you commit a Torah of the same category as the Av, you only have to bring one korban chatas within the same category, meaning you planting and then later you watering some other plants. The Torah is enhancing plant growth, as is planting, and therefore, because conceptually it's the same, you only have to bring one korban chatas. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Barry, does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So that's according to Rashi's definition. So here we see there's a difference. We see the difference that if the subcategory and the primary category share the same concept, okay, then in that particular case, you kind of covered. But it's not as Markov originally suggested, which is absolutely logical, that it's about intensity of punishment. In this case, it's conceptually the same. So what you're doing, and this is the point, is that you're not transgressing a subcategory. You're actually transgressing the primary category when you transgress the subcategory.
Okay.
Because it's within this same concept. And that's according to Rav Eliezer, that holds that there's absolute, Rav Eliezer actually says you bring a completely separate chatas offering. And I'll just tell you why he's got a different opinion here. But his concept is the same as Rashi. Is that he says that the only difference between an Av and a Toldos is purely historical. The one's mentioned in the Torah, the one is not. But they're the same. So you would bring a chatas offering for each one of them. And what the Gemara is saying is that, yes, So in other words, Rav Eli is saying there's no halachic significance, Marco, to answer your question, between the act of primary malacha or a subcategory. And the other rabbis are saying there's no primary significance in this halachic significance in the sense that if it's a Torah Av, you both get the death penalty. But if it's a Korban Chatas, you should actually bring two different Chatas offerings. But if it's within the same category, you're actually transgressing technically the Av twice. So there's no difference. We can see in Gemara Shabbos there is no difference. Am I making any sense here? Any questions from any of you on regards?
No, it's clear.
Okay, but Arthur, when you say it will sink in, is it making sense to you so far?
It makes sense, but my brain's still wrapping around it.
Okay. That's fine. Barry, is it making sense to you?
Yeah, it is. I probably feel the same way as Arthur. My brain's still wrapping around it. I'm not too sure where
All
my
right.
brain is at the moment.
Guys, I want to say something as well. Even hearing it the second time, I have to rethink things through. And the only way, and don't feel shy to talk about what you think in your head, because it's helping all of us. Try and Damon knows it hell of a well, and obviously, it does sound complicated, or so even not right now. I mean, it's much clearer than the first time, but it's important to just talk it through and to get this right. Otherwise, it all just sounds much more complicated afterwards. So even if we talk about this and get these concepts right from the beginning, I think it's very important. So the more you talk about it, the better. So don't feel embarrassed. If you think in your head, talk it out. Just talk it out.
Okay, and also,
I think that's important.
Okay.
I think that's very important because it helps all of us. I promise you. It's not like you should know all of this straight away. I still got to think about it as well.
Okay. Well, the good news is there'll be a video and recording for you guys, so you'll be able to watch it over.
Okay. Cool.
Great.
Listen, listen. It does take time to mull things to mull things over. That's for sure. I'm just going to mention I need 5 more minutes and we're done. I hope you prefer this organic way of learning rather than me just reading it, because I promise you, if I just read it, nobody's going to know what's going on.
No.
That's what we tried at first.
Damon, just the last, if I may feedback, just openly.
Sure.
Sometimes the last little comment you made, when you became a little bit more complicated, because so I don't know. I'd like you to repeat that last part again, just to get that right.
Sure.
Otherwise, I was okay up till then. Just maybe the last thing that you said about, it's become a bit more complicated. Please, if you don't mind.
Okay, so you need clarity on what the Korban Chatas, what's actually going on there. Is that correct? It'll take a sentence or two. I'll clear it up.
Yeah, okay, just I can't even repeat what you said then last, but just whatever you said last, just repeat again.
Okay, with pleasure.
Yeah, so I'm just, okay, go for it.
Okay, so Marco, you asked 2 salient points, and this is in response to you. Okay, the first point you asked is in terms of the degree of the severity of the damage with the Tordos and the Av, in terms of payment with regards to damages. Are the subcategories, the Tordos, the same as the Avos, the primary categories, in terms of the degree of payment, the severity?
Yes.
And what we did in Gemara Shabbos is the Gemara brings in Gemara Shabbos as an example where we can see that the Av and the Tordos are exactly the same in terms of punishment, because both the primary category and the subcategory gets the death penalty if you do it on purpose. And then it goes to that if you did it inadvertently by accident, that it's the same in the sense that if it's a different Av and a Tordos, you both bring a Korban Chatas. For whether it's an Av or a Tordos, it doesn't make a difference. And in that case, you see it's exactly the same in severity. The only point that I brought is that in the opinion of the Gemara, because the Gemara did want to save money to those that had to bring a korban chatas, is it says when that subcategory is the same as the primary category, we do see one small difference here. And that one small difference is that if it's within the same category of malacha, you only have to bring one korban chatas, and it was done as a mercy in order to save the person money, because these sacrifices were very expensive.
Yes.
And according to Rav Eliezer, all I was saying is that he said, no, you bring two separate ones, because the reality is, it might, is that the only difference is that there is no halachic significance, and the Gemara agrees between the Tordos and the Av in Shabbos. It's conceptual. The one's mentioned historically in the Torah as building the Mishkan, and the other one conceptually is the same. And if it fits within the category, you're not bringing a korban for the subcategory, you're actually bringing it under the category it falls in. So it's the same. So all I'm trying to say is in Gemara Shabbos, it's proving, because Rav Papa wants to say there are cases where the Tordos and the Avos are different in terms of severity, and they're bringing a case in the Gemara to show a case in Gemara Shabbos where it's not different. Meaning, if the Tordos and the Avs were in a different category conceptually, you still bring two korban chatases, and even if it's the same conceptually, they're still liable to the death penalty, still to the same sort of payments. So in Gemara Shabbos, you can see Tordos and Avos exactly the same severity, death penalties, korbanos, the same. So that's the point that it was trying to make. Is that clear? Is that more clear?
Yeah, much more clear. Yeah.
Now that Michael asked that, and he's got the courage to ask it, I know if you guys are following, because I know the arguments already and have learned it. To me, it's clear. So I need you, Barry, if you're not sure of something, to say to me, Damon, I don't understand. It's up to you guys to let me know what you're not following with, and then I can help you. It's the only way I can help you. What we're going to do next time, I think we can end off on this particular note, is we're going to go through the next time a Gemara in Tumas, which is impurity, to show that is the laws of the Avos and the Tordos, to bring a case where it's in fact different, where the intensity, the less the intensity or the severity, you can see that the Tordos and the Av are different. So the Tordos is less intense, less severe, and the Avos are more severe. So that answers Michael's question. So there are cases. So the reason why the Gemara is bringing a case in Gemara Shabbos, and in the case of Tumos, in the Gemara dealing with kalim, vessels, etc., is specifically because it wants to give you two opposite sides of the spectrum, where the subcategories and categories are the same in terms of punishments, and the case where the subcategories differ in intensity to the primary category. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so why is it doing all of this? Because it's going to come back and it says, listen, with regards to damages that we're going to be learning, we're only ever going to be learning primary categories and subcategories. In what cases with the subcategory do you have to make financial restitution equal to the primary category? And in what case do you make a less severe sort of payment, maybe not full payment, etc.? And you're even going to see cases where in the primary category, there are other mitigating factors, Marco, you remember, and Gavin, Karen, and Tom and Muad, which is part of the primary category where there's not full payments. So it doesn't mean that just something's because it's a primary category, you make full payment. They're extenuating circumstances, and these are very complicated affairs. But how we do it is we hit building block by building block, and once we've developed each of these concepts, we put them together in a logical format. Makes sense?
100%.
Okay, cool. Guys, sorry for the adventure. And I hope I did an okay job. When I was just reading it, I can promise you it didn't make any sense. Harry, to you, just as a matter of interest, when I was just reading it, in the beginning, did it make sense?
No, it does. It does make sense. Because I actually went through it a bit before, so I understood what you were talking about. So I had gone through it a bit.
Okay, so that's why it helps to do revision, guys, because if you do revision, it makes sense. So everything that I've covered now, is that what you read in terms of conceptually? I didn't want to address issues of Marve now and Pit and Fire, because if we're throwing everything in the mix, we'll never get clarity. We're just dealing with issue by issue. All right.
Yeah.
So this has been fun, and it's been lovely therapy to see all of you. Just one concept before we end is a mazik is a damager and a nizak is the damaged.
Okay. Did you just have
I call a mazik.
A mazik, yeah.
A mazik is a damager, and a nizak is the damaged.
Okay.
So when you pay nezek shalom, when you pay like nezek, nezek is damages, and nizak is the damaged party. A mazik is the damaging party. I mean, I've got a cat that I call a mazik because it damages everything here. It's not my cat. It's next door neighbor's cat. It's destroyed the furniture. Everything it's destroyed. So that's my nickname for it. It's like got claws and teeth. I don't know. It's like a snake with fur. So that's, that's a mazik. And I'm the nizak. I'm the one that's damaged. So, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Damon. That was very good.
All right.
Thanks.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ciao, bye.
Ciao, guys. Bye. Bye.